lead service line inventory, resources, and funding. All right, so in this section, we're going to review some of the funding programs for federal and state, some specifically dealing with lead service line replacement and the inventory process. We'll also review tools that TCEQ and EPA have developed to assist the water systems in developing their inventory. So some of the funding programs, LSLI, the lead service line inventory, and the lead service line replacement are and have always been eligible funding under multiple federal and state funding programs. Is not necessarily always specifically listed to say that that's what it is. These requirements to get rid of lead have to some extent always been in the rules, but not to the degree that we have currently. But through various types of funding, even just addressing, even and sometimes actually mitigation, you're able to do some type of work like this. So the funding resources that are out there, many times you can get pretty creative of how you can incorporate a project. I will want to mention the TWIC, Texas Water Infrastructure Coordination Committee. So this is a committee of funding agencies, a variety of different groups. So the Water Board, USDA, Texas Department of Agriculture, GLO, NADBank. There's a host of different people that have funding that meet, along with technical assistance providers to kind of help address some of the needs that different utilities come to this meeting and to ask questions about of maybe what would qualify to help them address some of their problems in their utility. So it is somewhat made to be a one-stop shop. So you can submit a funding inquiry form and it goes to the group, and then everyone in that group that has some eligible funding for that particular project or your type of utility, it's a way for them to reach out to you to say, these are the programs that we have. So if you're not familiar with TWIC, twic.org, get on there. There's some information. There should be also a list of funding resources guide. It shows all the different programs and all the different entities that are a part of this committee. So we're going to start off with state funding with the Texas Water Development Board. And instead of me going through this, we actually have someone from the board. Scott Galloway is going to go over this particular section with you. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. I'm Scott Galloway with the Texas Water Development Board, and thanks for inviting me out this morning to talk about funding for the lead service line replacement program. This is a brand new program from the Texas Water Development Board, and we'll go through some of the details about what's available, timelines, processes, and procedures. So the Texas Water Development Board's mission is to secure safe drinking water for the citizens of Texas. We're talking about the lead service line opportunities for funding, and then what financing we offer. I think most people know that the Texas Water Development Board is a non-regulatory state agency. We do a wide variety of things. We collect data for water planning. We produce the state water plan. We're now producing a state flood plan, which comes out next year. And then we function like a bank. We have funding for political subdivisions, cities, water districts, water utilities, for drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, and now flood mitigation projects also. We're going to be specifically talking about the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. TWDB has two federal programs, one the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and the second is the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, or for wastewater. And then the other slides or the other programs that you see identified on this slide are state dollar programs. Who's eligible? Basically any political subdivision in the state, city, county, river authority, water authority, WSC, MUD. If you're a public entity that provides drinking water, you're available. Funding is available to you. The Drinking Water State Revolving Fund was established back in 1996. That particular program is well defined. The policy, procedures, documentation is available on our website, EPA's website, but all of the processes are available for you to read through. So now we have some supplemental funding from the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. This was a new piece of legislation that was passed in November of 2021, and it has set aside funds for the lead service line program, and then also, you see it there at the very bottom, emerging contaminants program, which is also new. So the lead service line program is new for the Water Development Board, new for TCEQ, new for you, and then also emerging contaminants, same thing, new for us, new for you, and new for new opportunities. Talked a lot about service line locations this morning. This particular funding is available for public utilities for the inventory work and the line replacement work, so for both. But for the inventory or the replacement work, the service line from the water main to the inlet of a structure or home building is available for funding. Through this particular program, meters, mains, and premise plumbing are not eligible for funding. But the Water Development Board does have additional programs for water main funding and water meter funding, but that's not for this specific lead program. Something that's extremely unique for the Water Development Board funding is this funding is available on both the public utility side and private property. That's very unique for programs. Typically, our funding programs are only available for work on the public utility side. The funding can be, or the line replacement program, of course, goes from the water main to the inlet of the home. This little home drawing is just a typical setup what you may encounter in the field. We know, as you know, every field condition is going to be different, but typically it's some type of inlet connection to the building. Our funding doesn't go inside the structure or inside the building. Just an example of eligible activities for funding. Of course, the inventory work that we were talking about this morning, and then the line replacement work. You can finance non-routine lead sampling. This is going to be something that's above and beyond your typical required sampling for lead. So what you're trying to do here, something like we talked about this morning, is determining if there's lead in that service line from some additional sampling. Inventory methods that we've already discussed, all the different activities that we've discussed this morning are eligible for funding, including the site restoration, landscaping, sidewalks, driveways. Ineligible activities are the corrosion control studies. You often see corrosion control studies and corrosion control work lumped in together with lead service line activities, but that is ineligible activity. We understand that this is a tight timeline for systems to comply with the inventory of October of 2024. And our program has a very tight timeline. So we do allow reimbursement for activities that you may be currently doing now. However, it's very critical that you follow the federal procurement processes. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit in a few minutes. I have some more slides coming up. But one of the key components of the federal procurement process is Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. What is that? What's the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program? It's basically a program to ensure fair competitive bidding for any federal contracts, any federal funds. So if you accept these funds, you have to follow this program. A couple of things that are key in the program are when you're advertising for vendors, suppliers, materials, you have to include some specific language to make sure that it's fair for all communities to bid on these contracts. There's also a couple of websites you can post those notices on to announce your bidding opportunities. The Water Development Board on our website has some programs and self-help manuals to walk you through the disadvantaged business enterprise process. We also have a few staff members that specifically work on this program that'll be happy to answer specific questions for you as you walk through the process. So what phases are available or eligible for funding? It's pretty much, you can do inventory work only, you can do inventory plus line replacement work, or you can do line replacement work only, the construction for the line replacement only. What this yellow highlight is describing, though, is we're encouraging communities and utilities to apply for both the inventory activities and the line replacement work. I have a slide coming up talking about the dollar amounts and what's available, but there's a large dollar amount available for public utilities, and what we're encouraging you to do is kind of dream big, think big, apply for both the inventory work and the line replacement work. So this fiscal year, we have a little over $213 million available for utilities in Texas. That's for this fiscal year that we're currently in. One great thing about this particular program, it's about 50% grant and 50% low interest loan. The actual numbers are 51% principal forgiveness, which is a fancy way of saying grant. And then the second portion would be 49% low interest loan. If you try to finance the inventory work only, that would be at 0% interest rate for the loan portion. And I've got a little simple math equation to show you.
Just a quick question going back to the eligible projects. Is reimbursement available for those eligible projects under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund?
Well, for what phase? Can you clarify the question a little bit?
Yeah, in one of the webinars at TWDB, there was mention of reimbursement being available for any of the phases that are approved or the projects that are approved under the DWSRF.
That's correct, and that was here. We're talking about reimbursement is an acceptable activity. Like if you're working currently on your inventory work, make sure you keep that documentation if you want to be reimbursed. However, the real critical step or component of reimbursement is to make sure you're following the federal procurement process. If you don't follow the federal procurement process and you turn in reimbursement expenses, they were not going to be eligible.
Thank you.
Again, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, we have some self-help guidance material available on our website, and then we have a few staff members that work in that program that can answer questions and concerns about reimbursement and following the federal procurement process. So for instance, if you come in for $100,000, you think you're going to spend $100,000, these are just real simple numbers to work with as an example, that $100,000 could be inventory work and line replacement work combined. There's a 2% loan origination fee, but it's only on the loan portion. The 51% principal loan forgiveness in this example would be $51,000 grant funds. So you're taking, almost half and half out of $100,000, $49,980 for the loan, and then $51,000 for the grant. The loan portion can be financed up to 30 years if you're doing the construction activities for line replacement work. If you're doing inventory only, you can finance that for 15 years at 0% interest. If you do the construction work for the loan portion, that interest rate will be our subsidized interest rate at the time of loan closing. As we know, market conditions, interest rates change all the time based on economic conditions and market conditions. Typically, all of our funding programs, both the state dollar programs and the federal dollar programs that we offer, are always below open market interest rates. That's the reason communities come to us for financing. They can save money on interest rates. Typically, a good rule of thumb is our rates are about 1 to 1.5 percentage points below open market. When I say open market, that's going to your local bank. So going to your local bank, we can beat that deal every day, all day, through all of our programs. Typically, too, we can beat the cost of issuing bonds. A lot of communities, especially cities, will issue bonds for infrastructure projects for water and wastewater utilities. We can beat those overhead costs of issuing bonds, too, if you come to us for other fundings through this program or additional programs. Any questions on that, on the percentage breakdown, loan versus grant, principal forgiveness? What makes you eligible for the grant or principal forgiveness? There's a lot of different criteria that we use. One of the biggest ones, though, is if you're considered a disadvantaged community. And what does that mean? We use U.S. Census data for annual median household income for your community. If you go to the U.S. Census Bureau's website, you can find your community name listed there, and it'll have your annual median household income identified. We're using the 2017 through 2021 American Community Survey. That's the most recent census data that's available. So if your community is not listed on the census website, you may have to use the census tract and block groups. And I know for some of you rural systems, y'all may have a service area that's, square miles, measured in square miles in distance. Though you'll have to go to the census tracts and block groups, match up your service boundary within those tracts, and then you can record the annual median household income that's identified in those census tracts. A little bit of legwork, but it's not too complex. If you want to find just your AMHI, what I often do is just Google your community name plus AMHI, and usually you'll find the census number will pop up in some of your Google search results. We also, the Water Development Board, on our website have an Excel template that we've created using this data. Download that template, go in and find your name, and it will tell you your AMHI number. The interesting thing about this program, if your AMHI is less than $100,982, you're eligible for the 51% grant. Most communities in Texas are going to be well below the threshold of over $100,000. I've done a Google search on that too, and only found a few communities listed in Texas, a dozen or so, that are above that number. So we did that on purpose. The Water Development Board did it on purpose. All states participate in the SRF programs, and the states have some flexibility on how they manage it. For us to try to move these funds out of the Water Development Board and into your hands, the local communities, we made this number very high on purpose. That way, just about every community in the state will qualify for 51% grant. Any thoughts or questions on that? I know it gets confusing when you start talking about federal funds. There's a lot of overhead, a lot of details that go into accessing the federal funds, but trying to be here today to answer any questions or explain some of the details of the program. So how does it work? You start with a project information form, which is our initial loan application form. It's a form that's about 5 or 6 pages long, basically asks you who, what, when, and where, contact information, address, population, number of connections, those type of just basic information. The thing that's critical, though, in your project information form is your scope of work and then a budget for your project. Typically, the Water Development Board finances projects. That's what we talk in terms of. We're financing a project. Project could be building a new drinking water plant, drilling a new well, and now this program for the lead. So a project would be financing either the inventory or the line replacement or both. The way the program works, this is typical for all of our state revolving fund programs. You submit that project information form. You notice the number is highlighted there. The date that's highlighted was yesterday, May 23rd. However, because of this tight timeline that we are under and you are under for this program, we are still accepting applications for this lead service line program. And we will for the next several, probably throughout the summer. You can go ahead and submit this application. But the way the process works is we receive the project information form from a local utility. We review and rank it through a detailed criteria list. We'll have a draft intended use plan. The intended use plan is a document, a guidance document that's developed on all the federal programs that we administer. And basically what it is like my analogy I like to use is like a sports program guide. You know, you go to a football game, you get a program, tells you about the teams, the players, the coaches, the strategies, all the details of the game. Well, the intended use plan is that same type of thing for each program. It tells you processes, procedures, timelines, percentages, all the rules and regulations for that particular funding program. So it's kind of like your guidance manual. Right now, that guidance manual is in draft form. We are encouraging communities to read that document, and then you can make comments on it, good or bad comments, about how you feel the program operates, what's good, what's bad, what's difficult. And when that public comment period is later this summer, middle of July. After we receive those comments and address those comments, then the intended use plan will go to the Water Development Board's Board of Directors for approval. When they approve it, that intended use plan is then the guidance document for this program for the fiscal year. Something that's critical to know about all the state revolving fund programs, each fiscal year, each funding program, whether it's drinking water or clean water, has an intended use plan. And those intended use plans change year to year. So if you came to the board for funding a few years ago, all of that information was specific for that fiscal year that you came to us for. So each fiscal year, the documents change, the guidance, the program changes, just like the sports, going back to the sports analogy. Every time you go to a football game or something, the program manual changes from game to game, season to season. Same thing with the intended use plan. So start now. Formal applications will be submitted in September through the fall and into the end of 2023. If you're eligible and qualified and everything lines up perfectly, we'll start closing on the loan funding or the grant funding in probably January, February of 2024. So start now, you'll have dollars in hand maybe early next year through the spring of 2024. And then remember, if you're trying to be reimbursed, you have to follow those federal procurement processes. Just some general information. I'll let you read this on your own. It's general information about what type of information and data is required in the project information form. One thing that the project information forms have, typically they're signed and sealed by a professional engineer. However, we are extending that date for sign and signature from a PE until that public comment period in the middle of July, because again, it's type time frame. So, but it does have to be signed and sealed if your funding application is over $100,000. If it's less than $100,000, you don't have to have a PE sign and seal it. That's just the project information form. Now, when you go to the formal application, a PE would have to sign and seal the formal application. Let me tell you about that. So you submit this short document, we review it, make sure that you're eligible. If you are eligible, you'll be notified immediately. Yes, you're eligible. You'll then be invited to submit the formal application. Formal application is pretty involved. Just think if you've purchased a home and gone through the home mortgage process, think of all the documents and backup material that you had to provide for that. You'll have to provide, that similar type of documentation for your utility. But you would know mid to late summer if your project is eligible, if you're invited to submit the formal application, and at that time you'll know the dollar amount that you've submitted in the form of grant and loan is eligible or considered approved by us. And then the formal application period would start. A few things to be aware of, again, talking about federal dollars. So federal dollars have a lot of oversight, a lot of tasks associated with them. Some of the tasks and requirements that you have to follow are Davis-Bacon wage rate requirements, American Iron and Steel. The new one, it's a new federal program, the Build America and Buy America program. Again, it was started in 2021. There's a website available for Build America, Buy America that lists what the compliance items are listed there. But basically, it's materials and vendors have to comply with products being sourced and manufactured in the U.S. So pipe, valves, fittings, on and on, have to be built or sourced in the U.S. Can't use foreign products. But on that website that I just mentioned, they have a list of products that are identified there. But mainly, if you're building something new, a new construction project, it's mostly every type of material except for landscaping material and paving material. So it pretty much covers everything. I have a resource list coming up here in a couple of slides, and that particular website is linked there for your information. The other items you have to follow are governmental accounting procedures, public awareness signage. There's a couple of websites that are available that you can post that, yes, we've received these federal funds and this is how we're going to intend to use it. And then finally, again, reiterating the federal procurement process. There's the link for the Buy America, Build America. It lists all the details of that particular program and identifies all the construction materials that need to comply with the Buy America, Build America Act. We also have a program called WIFA. This has funding available for lead removal, but it's usually typically for really large projects. As you can see there, a project greater than $20 million, but there are some set-asides for small communities, but your project minimum is $5 million. This particular program doesn't follow that same timeline as the lead service line program that I've been talking about, but you have to start with a letter of submission to EPA Region 6 for Texas. And that's how that process starts. Then we also have a project called Water Infrastructure Improvement for the Nation. Again, these are federal programs that the Water Development Board manages for Texas. The eligibility are small communities, 10,000 or less, lead testing for schools and daycares. And again, you apply through both TWDB and Region 6 office. There is a July, this says rolling deadlines based on June 22, but my understanding there's a July announcement coming out that will show deadlines for the upcoming year or the rest of the remaining of 2023. Inventory life cycle, you've already seen that several times, so we'll move on. Just a few helpful tips on applying for our funding. That's really true of any of our funding programs. If it's the lead service line program or some of the other programs, we're going to want to see your most recent financial audit, your independent audit for your local utility. We want to make sure that you can take on debt. Do you have the wherewithal to pay us back, basically? And how is that debt going to be paid back? Typically, communities and utilities use drinking water and wastewater rates as a revenue source to pay us back. That doesn't have to be so, but that's the typical way. You can use other tax revenue too to pay us back, but we're going to have to determine you have the wherewithal to pay us back on the loan portion. Other things that you may be familiar with the Water Development Board, we have an annual water use survey and water loss audit reports that are due to us. I think they were due back in the March and May of this year. We want to make sure those are up to date. And then water conservation and drought contingency plan, if that applies to you, make sure those reporting requirements are up to date. If some of these items are outstanding, that's going to kind of stall the process of proceeding with the loan. So we want to make sure that you're up to date on all our reporting requirements. And then finally, talk often and early with us, with myself. I have a couple of other colleagues that do marketing and outreach like this, and they're coming up next. But we're here to help you. We want to answer your questions. We want to help walk you through the project. We want to get these funds out of Austin and into local communities and have a successful project for us and for you. Just contact information and then resource information too on these next couple of slides. One thing that I want to mention too, that there's about $213 million available this current fiscal year. There will be funding available over the next year or two, but we don't know the dollar amount right now, and we don't know the percentage breakdown. And when I say the percentage breakdown, the grant versus loan. It will probably be different next year than it is currently. So we're encouraging communities to apply now. Even if you missed that May 23rd deadline, go ahead and apply, get in the queue, because if we don't use these funds for lead service line, this is a new program. If we don't use it, it goes back to the feds if Texas doesn't use the $213 million. So what we want to do to ensure we get the $213 million and then additional funds next few years, we want to use all that money and then show even more demand for the future that says, hey, these communities even need more money than $213 million. So if we don't use it, we lose it. That's unique. It's not standard for our other programs that we have, but it is on this lead program. Mention another program that's brand new for us. Give a plug for that. That's emerging contaminants. It's a federal program to address emerging contaminants in drinking water. Now, what's an emerging contaminant? It's basically chemicals that EPA doesn't currently monitor, or they don't have a reporting parameter or requirement for. The big thing is PFOS. I can't remember the name of PFOS. It's a long name, but the acronym is PFOS. What is PFOS? Those are things like fire-fighting foam, non-stick cooking surfaces like on your skillet, like Teflon and things like that, waterproof clothing chemicals, a wide variety of chemicals that are involved in our everyday life. Paint, mentioned lead earlier this morning, those type of things. If your community can address, if you're facing emerging contaminants like that, there's a lot of grant money, I think $53 million this fiscal year for Texas. Project information forms are due on that June 7th. So like a week and a half away is when the project information forms due. But remember, that's only a few pages, about 5 to 6 pages, who, what, when, and where, your scope of work and budget. But it's 100% grant. no loan associated with it at all. And it follows that same $100,000 AMHI, and that includes most communities in Texas, would be available for PFAS emerging contaminants grant. But you have to make sure that you demonstrate in your scope of work that that money would address emerging contaminants or PFAS in your local community. It could be treatment, it could be developing new water sources, a wide variety of things, but that's a whole different topic than the lead. That's a whole new program for us, but just be aware of that. There's a lot of federal money available for lead and these emerging contaminants. Again, both of those programs are new. If Texas doesn't use the money, they have to turn it back in. So we want to make sure that everyone kind of is aware of this. Think big, dream big when you're submitting your scope of work and your budget. We can always narrow the scope and the dollar amount of the budget if you need to as you move through the process. So that's okay. We can work with you to try to refine exactly what is beneficial to the local utility. And see, what else? I was going to think something else I was going to mention to you. Oh, that's something else. You're not committed. You can fill out one of these project information forms. You can go through most of the process. And for whatever reason you decide not to move forward, you're not obligated to be committed to the program. You can withdraw your application. About the only time you can't withdraw your application is when you're getting ready for loan closing, like you're a month out from going to our board of directors to close on the funds, sign the signatures, capture the dollars in hand. We don't want you to withdraw then. But as you're going through kind of the draft phase and the initial review phase, you can withdraw if you so choose. Any thoughts or questions on this before I turn it back over to Jason? There's other funding available. We're not the only game in town. I think there's a booklet that was out on the table that shows federal funding available for lead service line and other programs too. Just know that Water Development Board's here to work with you. We'd like for you to use these funds and have access to them, as soon as possible to ensure you have a successful lead service line replacement program. All right, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you, Scott. Well, we'll continue on with the funding and then touch on the resources. And then at the end of this, we're also going to have Q&A. So if you have been holding any questions, please get those ready to go. So continuing on with funding, Community Development Block Grant. Texas Department of Agriculture also has a program that could be utilized. Again, some of these funding options that are out there and opportunities don't necessarily specifically tell you that it's dedicated to lead service line replacement, but there are ways to work into certain projects. So these are typically focused on, or actually eligible for cities and counties, local governments that qualify for these development block grants. So for utilities like a WSC or investor-owned utilities, at times you can work with your county to get involved in one of these community development block grants. There are eligible activities for public facilities on LSLI. As you see that there's limitations there, cities less than 50 and counties less than 200 with a maximum award of about 500,000. Investor-owned utilities, I kind of mentioned this already. I would suggest, because there is a lot of funding that is not eligible for those particular types of water systems. So the best route that I have seen is working with your county. I know just here recently through like ARPA funds, there were some utilities that were able to work through the county to actually get different equipment. But that was really the primary option that they had to get some help. You can also work with your council of governments, your COGS. I believe there's 24 or 26 around the state. They typically have some different opportunities available to you as well. Water and environmental programs through USDA Rural Development. They have a construction loans and grants and loan guarantees for drinking water infrastructure. The planning costs, or the PAD, the planning, acquisition, and design, are typically also eligible for this. Their programs are typically focused for 10,000 population or less. They do have loan terms up to 40 years, and I believe USDA uses, I believe it's grant, it may be loan forgiveness. I know between the Water Board and USDA that the terminology is a little different, but typically the same thing. So those are options for the utility side. Options for funding on the homeowner portion of the lead service line. So USDA also has a program, they call it the 504 Home Repair Program. This is used to remove health hazards from the residents. This is a program, it's eligible based on homeowner income and poverty level. It can be a maximum loan up to $40,000, but also a grant up to $10,000. So you can apply for the grant up to $10,000 to replace lead service line or a galvanized requiring replacement. You can go through that program, and that is directly from the customer through USDA. There is a little caveat there that I think is worth mentioning, that up to, you get, for example, say you get the $10,000 in grants, and then you go for a loan, over $7,500 in loan, they do require some kind of collateral, so to speak, so like a lien on a property. So, but you can still, eligible up to $17,500 to get work done for any kind of replacement line, which is a pretty good program through USDA. So utilizing grant and loan funds to subsidize homeowner replacement costs. Using one example, the state revolving fund, as Scott mentioned, to pay for the homeowner side. So if the system were so inclined to do so, to take out loans, to actually go ahead and address it all, I know it probably doesn't seem like the best option. Your utility is not so much focused on trying to fund the customer, but there are going to be some cases to where it is just the best avenue to get the situation resolved if you do have a lot of lines that do get replaced. So there is an opportunity there through some of that. I will go ahead and throw in also, there has been questions, and I don't think I really covered it anywhere else, and maybe it was addressed in Phillips and Elston's section, but whenever we discuss doing the homeowner line replacement, there's always a concern of liability. And so whenever I've spoke to a few different utilities, and whenever they're considering doing this, say they do have a line that has to be replaced, it is the customer's responsibility to replace it, but it is you as a utility to make sure it is done. So there's a suggestion that you should probably use contractors. When you're going to do something like that, or in this case, if you were funding to get it done, use local plumbers or something to where the liability is on a third party. It's not on the utility itself. We've had many occasions in my past to where I just try to help someone out on the private side of the meter because it was there, I was just trying to be nice, and then from there on, my utility is responsible for that particular valve or that piece of pipe that we helped fix, just out of being nice. So there are some concerns with the liabilities of doing customer side lines. So consider that if it is an option to where the utility is going to address the customer line, consider going out for bids, third party, have another company or contractor do something like that. Using water infrastructure improvement or the WIN grant funds to pay
Jason,
for this.
can I add a comment too?
Yes.
Again, with this is on specifically for the Water Development Board funding that I was just speaking of earlier, and I wanted to make sure everyone's clear. Our funding, a partial line replacement is ineligible. So if you only replace the public utility side, that would be ineligible for our funding. The entire lead service line from the public side to the private property side has to be replaced.
Okay. And through that particular fund for lead service?
Through that particular fund, the lead service line program, the new program that I was describing.
Okay, thank you. So another option is using the WIN grants, the federal grant. There was a case study in the EPA website. Rhode Island was able to secure $218,000 through the WIN grant or WIN Act grant to provide grants to disadvantaged households in the town. So homeowners would apply for the grants, obtaining the funding through that replacement program for the meter. So there is opportunities to where the utility can apply for grants and then the homeowner themselves apply into the utility. You have to, we're digging into the details of what that looks like through that particular grant, but there are some opportunities like that as well. Using funds from ratepayers to pay zero interest loans. So there was a case to where the water authority was to provide homeowners with a zero-interest loan to cover the cost of replacement on the private sideline. The rate revenue is being utilized to pay back the loan. So adjusting in rates to be sure that we're addressing all of the lead service line issues that you have in the utility. And then there was some alternate source funding. So if you can get a little creative, there are some of our utilities that actually make some revenues off of renting out storage space on the tanks for communication towers, maybe even leasing some of the property. There are things like that to where that additional revenue may be used to try to fund some of the private homeowner side in the cases to where they just really can't afford to handle that. Because again, you do have to, as a utility, make sure or address the situation if a line has to be replaced. You're just not really on the hook to pay for it, but in some cases, it may be just the best way for the utility and for the community if you can help in some manner. There are a lot of availability for different programs through HUD. This is all federal funding, and some dwindles down through the states, such as General Land Office, GLO. But you can look online for the Housing and Urban Development. There are different programs there. I believe we counted about 9 different programs that are eligible for homeowner replacement, or line replacement rather. So there are different funding options. As far as in inventory resources, we go ahead and put this on here too, that EPA, the funding guidance. So there's another manual, I think it's 20, 30 pages long. You look up, type this in on the search bar for the EPA website, and it's a manual that has basically described each of the programs, such as the WIN grant, such as SRF funds, such as some of the HUD programs that are available. So it's composed into a single document. That there's some different resources there. Again, primarily looking at it from a federal side. And again, some of those programs are channeled down through the states, like SRF, through the Water Board. But it gives you some guidance on some different programs there. Another resource is what you have in front of you or online if you have downloaded from either that Dropbox link, or you can get on, again, EPA's website and just search guidance for developing and maintaining a service line inventory. This is that manual we've been kind of hitting on through most of this presentation. A lot of good information in there, a lot of examples, even some of the resources that they say you can do. There's even case studies in there that say, even though you can, it's probably not the most beneficial. So like the CCTVs, that was one option to do investigations to see if you can actually find out if there is lead on the valves and such. And then it gives an example in there that there was a town in Philadelphia, I believe, that they tried this, and about 75% of the lines that they actually did camera inspections on were really unreadable. So it was not the best use of time and money. So even though that is an option, they tell you some examples in there to kind of give you a little guidance on whether you should go through with that or spend the time on it or not. So really good resource. Take that and read through it, please, if you're trying to figure out exactly what methods you want to use to establish your inventory. Just the website itself, lead service line replacement. They have a lot of different links on EPA's website. A lot of them also, I believe we have on TCEQs too, at least reference to some of the EPA information. They do have a lot of public education, some of the infographics and things like that as well. So there's some resources there for that. We talked about the funding section. They do have some case studies of how other areas are doing some of theirs. EPA has an analysis on lead service lines and replacements and kind of what the general consensus is across the nation. There's different research on the different types of materials there. This site has additional information on analysis and best practices and challenges when implementing and maintaining a service line replacement program. So additional resources for that when it comes to the point of replacement. Additional links, so there is fact sheets also on EPA as far as the rule, the Federal Register, the press releases of when this rule came out, all of the details and data from that, even more so than just the inventory, but all the other components that will be going into effect as of October of next year. Some additional links and information, all the resources from EPA dealing with just lead in drinking water in general. So again, the guidance, there's some webinars, some of the information and guidance on what the goal is behind doing all of these changes for lead and copper. And then there's some information about school programs in there. On TCEQ's website, if I can pull it up, if I have time in a minute and get connected, I'll try to pull the website up here. But the lead and copper rule revision section on the website has a lot of what you're going to be needing for this. It has the form, the template. It has an SOP, so standing operating procedures for how to gather this information. I think it's about 9 pages. A lot of it is instructional, but the last 2 pages are actually the template you can use for multi-service investigations or even a single site investigation. So it's kind of a work order, so to speak, at the end where you can go through each service, check off how you determined, what records you used, if you did visual inspection. It's kind of a way to do the check the boxes for each service line, and then you can build your inventory from that. Trying to see if there was also, yeah, I'll see if I can pull that up here shortly. DWAG, the Drinking Water Advisory Work Group, there's another resource of information on TCEQ's website. They have information on the lead and copper rule. They also have a YouTube channel and some of the recorded meetings to where they discuss a lot of this rule changing and how the implementation is being done. So if you have time to check that out, there's a lot of good information that goes on through those meetings. This is what I mentioned about the school care. This is something that if you do service schools in your public utility, I would encourage you to at least share this information with them. This is a volunteer program. It's also free for the schools. So get them to look into this as a free testing for the school itself. I don't know, Lily or somebody, can y'all tell me, if a school does get involved with this program, will this take the place of the sampling that's going to go on for the 20% per year?
Yeah, that's a great question. It will not be accepted as part of the required school testing come 2025.
Okay. So this is just more voluntary for education and information purposes for the school?
Yes,
okay.
Correct.
TCEQ Small Business, they have some information there also on the inventory. This is another group similar to FMT. They do assistance, I believe mostly virtual. I don't know, do they do on-site or is it just remote type work? They do on-site as well? Okay. Yeah, so the TCEQ has a lot of different ways to provide help. It's not just the regulatory authority. They are trying to assist utilities to comply with all the different things that they're asking of us. So small business is another good resource for that. If you look up even the region map on the TCEQ website, typically you'll get a 2-page PDF, the map itself, and then the second page has a lot of context for each region. Each one of those will have a small business contact person on there. So, we're at the end. Commonly asked questions. We do have a list of common questions that TCEQ was receiving that someone's going to see if Elston could go through some of those. But prior to that, Emily, is there any additional questions online?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions.
Okay,
So-
well, let's address those first. Maybe we will cover some of the ones he was going to ask.
Okay. Probably not, but there are some questions here for Scott that just kind of popped up. They want to know why the deadline for the emerging contaminants is so soon, and they're saying there's not enough time to get an engineer's help. They're saying there's not enough time to get engineers' help. I guess it's due June 7th.
Correct. So the emerging contaminants, which is a new program for us also, the application is due June 7th. Yes, we understand that's too quick. That announcement of the program just came out like a month or so ago. So it's accelerated timeline. Again, you don't have to have an engineer sign or seal that project information form. That particular task will have to be done. It will have to be signed and sealed by an engineer, but it will be extended for another month to 6 weeks or so. I would recommend, if you're interested in the emerging contaminants, try to go ahead and get your project information form into us by June 7th. But we understand that there's probably additional information that you want to provide, such as the PE sign and signature, that you can work through after the June 7th deadline.
And another question for Scott says, I'm wondering if the folks who followed the NOFO and deadline for submission will be given additional consideration during the ranking and scoring process. I'm wondering if the folks who followed the NOFO, and the deadline for submission will be given additional consideration during the ranking and scoring process.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that acronym is. So does anyone happen to know? NOFO? I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm not sure about that.
Whoever, Robert Haberle, if you want to provide what you mean by NOFO, we can get your question later. There is another question. If copper lines are found, do they fall under the brass fittings before the change in lead of brass fittings?
So copper lines are considered non-lead through the inventory categorization, but can you repeat the question? It sounds more specific than that.
Yeah, if copper lines are found, do they fall under this and brass fittings before the change of lead?
I think that's referring to a specific column in the inventory. And I would say no, that column is specific to fittings and appurtenances.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so if lead joint soldering, flux, connectors, goosenecks, any of that are found, they don't make that service line a lead service line. They should be replaced when encountered, and they may be required to be replaced under LCRR. But again, they don't classify that line as a lead line.
Okay. I think that kind of answers this question. If it appears that the service line is PVC by looking at the meter box, what do we put in column S in the worksheet on whether there is a lead solder in the service line when the entire service line hasn't been inspected?
So the lead solder, any of the solders and fittings are not required to be identified and classified. They should be identified as they are encountered, but they are not required. So visual inspection of a PVC pipe can just be categorized as non-lead.
Okay, just a few more. If you have not started the inventory but have a good idea that at least 95% of your service lines are clear of lead, is loan grant application necessary at this point?
So there's an option for classification on unknown but likely lead. So I think that would be our preference. We are not wanting public water systems to just guess or make an approximation based on a subset of locations. So I would say unknown likely lead. That is a categorization in the inventory.
Okay. Let's see here. Since we do not know how many lines might have been replaced by customers, how do we know how much money we would need to fund the service line replacement? I think this is a question for Scott mainly.
Yes, it's going to be a kind of an educated guess, so to speak. Something that you may consider if you have an older section or older neighborhood of town that meets that timeline that you were describing earlier, Jason, that would probably be an area that you would probably want to identify and seek a lot of funding for that particular area, as opposed to a new subdivision that's been built recently. But we understand that is unknown at this time. How do you know what you're going to replace until you do your inventory? It's a real catch-22. So we're just encouraging you to do your best estimate on the line replacement portion of the funding. If you don't need all the funds, you can return it at no penalty or something like that. But it's my personal opinion, it'd be better to ask for more than less and not be caught with a low budget and you still need to do a lot of work.
TCEQ just said to start now on your LSLI. So you can have a better idea of that funding. So that's an incentive to get started now. So that NOFO, they were saying it's a notice of funding opportunity. Okay. Anybody else?
But I do think the question was if they are following whatever's required in that notice and also meeting the requirements or the timelines, are they better poised to be ranked higher? I think that was part of the question, right?
Yeah.
Following that, I haven't seen that identified in our criteria for ranking.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, another question. If a record review produces drawings that specifies that all piping to be NSF certified for potable water service, is that sufficient to determine that the piping is non-lead?
I think that's going to depend on when that NSF certification was identified. I think, Alex, do you have an idea about NSF certified?
The NSF certification just means that it can either A, be in a direct additive, like your chlorine, like standard 60, or more applicable standard 61, that it's approved to come in contact with drinking water. I don't know if that necessarily, I think that might be a little bit of a leap to say that means it doesn't have lead in it. I can't necessarily answer that, but my tendency would be to say probably not.
Yeah, I would agree. If it's not clear, the identification, that sounds like an unknown.
Okay. I think that was all the questions.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, then, I'll let Elston, if you want to come up here so you can be spotlighted in camera.
All right.
And all that.
And I'm just do a few, and Philip's going to do a few as well.
Okay. And again, these are some of the questions that TCEQ said they were getting towards the beginning, kind of the onset, that may be worth just going over again. So we're going to go through a few of those.
So one of the first ones that are listed, I think we've gone through it a lot, but it's probably worth mentioning one more time. And the question is, our water system does not have lead copper service lines. All material used is PVC or similar material. Will we still be required to complete a service line inventory spreadsheet? Also, are we going to be required to take inventory of the piping material from the meter to the place of residency? So, and the answer is yes. All community water systems and non-transit, non-community water systems are required to submit a service line inventory. I think we beat that pretty good today. But I think that I brought it up just because if there is a question about if you know for a fact you don't have lead service lines, do you still need to do it? And just want to emphasize that you still need to complete the inventory. There is also the availability of, as was just mentioned earlier, that if you don't know, then you can also use the unknown. It's like the second part of that. And you do have to do both sides, both the publicly owned water system side and the privately owned citizen side or homeowner side.
One note about that, if a system does confirm all non-lead service lines, the public accessibility requirement is a little bit altered, so a system could just issue a statement in their CCR that they have all non-lead service lines instead of providing the inventory.
Okay. All right, the next one is, I mentioned earlier, there was the significance of the after 2014 date. And so the answer to that is in 2014, there was an amendment to the 1986 lead ban that reduced the definition of lead-free for piping and pipe fittings to 0.25%. And so that's, if we've heard that mentioned earlier, that, if it's after 2014, you don't have to worry about, not that you don't have to worry about it, but it's most likely not lead. And then specifically in the school sampling, it said that any structures constructed after 2014, they did not need to be sampled, and that is why, because of the lead ban. All right, so let's put it over to Phillip.
Thank you. First, these questions we are reading are coming from the TCEQ Frequently Asked Questions document. So for those that are in the chat or registered, that can be downloaded from the Dropbox. So you can get that and actually go back and review it as well. One question that came up during the break was that, how do you classify the lead service or the service line if you have a house, a single family house on a meter connection, and then on the same property, there are several other houses connected to that house? How many people have seen that in the field? Yeah, quite a few, right? So you have the house, and then somebody else moves in, say a mobile home behind the regular house, and then they run another line from that house to the other house. Someone else moves in, and they put in a lead line to connect the second house to the third house. How is that line classified? Who wants to guess? Lead, right? Because remember when we did the template and we showed if any portion was lead, the line is considered lead. So that would be a lead line. Not to mention they're violating TCEQ rules, but that's another item. But yeah, in terms of the inventory, that's going to be a lead line, okay? I'm going to start from the bottom of the frequently asked questions. How can water systems afford to complete the inventory? So it's a long answer on that, but two major components. One, we have the FMT assistance program, TCEQ does. Well, people can come out and provide on-site assistance, not doing the form for you, but providing guidance on how to do the form. And then Scott has just gone through all of the state, federal programs, and Jason went through the state programs and the federal programs by Jason on the various fundings programs that are available, some grant, some low-cost loans, on how you can afford to do the inventory. But remember, the inventory initially is going to be focused on records review. So that shouldn't really require a lot of funding to do that, maybe to hire somebody to do it, and possibly. Okay, and there's also a link on that question to a EPA webinar on that issue. Scott, is y'all webinar posted on y'all website or through your YouTube or? Not yet. Okay, but it will be at some point.
I add something to the funding about that question about affordability, and that's one thing that we will allow for this lead service line program is in-house work or force account work by the local utility using your own staff. And that's especially true with the records and data search that you could do. You could use your own staff to do that. If you want to use force account using your own staff, be sure and identify that in your project information form that you want to use in-house people to do the records review and record search. That's acceptable, but you do need to identify that, and then we have to make sure that that process is approved by the Water Development Board. But the way that you would do that is you would probably have some type of timesheet or labor code report or something like that, that you could bill those hours to the lead service line research and data inventory.
Is that in-house staff funding eligible for the forgiveness loan component?
I'm not sure. I don't guess I understand exactly. So would they obtain the grant and then use those dollars somehow else, or pay their staff, or?
Yeah, pay the staff.
Yes. That would still be the force account. It doesn't matter if it's the grant or the loan portion. you would still be force account, and we would just need, you would need to receive our approval to do that work in-house, and then be able to document the labor hours that are charged to those type of activities. And that could be done too on the line replacement also, but of course, you know, that's going to be unusual based on how many people you have working for you, because everybody has a day job. You know, you don't have opportunities to do new work in addition to what you're normally doing every day.
So would that also be eligible for if the system decided to go hire a contractor, maybe a college intern or some other school teachers that's out for the summer to go
Yes.
through records research? Would that be eligible for reimbursement?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Right.
So that's
And then-
ways you can fund it.
And then, of course, hiring a consultant to do it, of course,
Yeah.
too.
Okay, our system has irrigation meters that provide water to street green spaces for landscaping solely. They would never be utilized to feed water structures, water fountains, sinks, etc., used for drinking water. Do these meters need to be included on the inventory? And actually should read, do these lines, service lines, need to be included on the inventory?
Yes, that's correct. So any line that is currently serving potable water or has the ability to ever serve potable water needs to be inventoried on that form.
Okay, so that's different than what's on the frequently asked question. At the bottom it says, if the line does not go to a building, it does not need to be included in the inventory. So that needs to be changed because that's how it was published.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, the next question directly
To the
above
building
that
inlet.
kind of adds a little confusion
Yeah.
to it. Does the inventory need to include irrigation and fire line pipes? And that answer clearly is yes. It should include those lines if they can ever be repurposed in the future for potable or non-emergency use. Then those service lines should be included in the inventory.
Yes, and I think that goes back to the earlier question about the eye wash station. So yeah, if it can
exactly.
be used for potable water.
So here's the safe approach. If there's any doubt, include it in the service line inventory. You can always delete it later. But if in doubt, include it. Anybody else got any other ones?
I had one other question that I'm just surprised that I haven't heard yet today. If we get to the point of past record review and we're doing visual inspections, the question I have been asked a lot is how much do you really have to expose to see or determine what the line is? So we talked about looking inside of a meter box and seeing PVC. Is there anything to say that PVC didn't go just 6-8 inches because they made a repair, but it is in fact galvanized from there on? How would we know that? Is it still safe to assume that it is PVC line? Because there were questions about, do you have to go 3 feet from the box? Do you have to do every 15 feet? Is there a certain requirement of how much to expose to be able to determine this? So that was a question that I was actually hoping that we could ask TCQ to answer. But I think she's answering
That came
other
up in
questions.
Beaumont too.
Yes.
I was speaking with this gentleman in front of me.
I know, I was trying to extend my comment out so it would give you time to finish up.
Yeah, I'm so
but
sorry.
That's okay. I have had questions, we've had questions about visual inspections. If we have to go to that point, they can't find the records to determine. Is there any specific requirement to say there is a certain amount of pipe, a location? Do they have to dig up 3 feet from the box? Is just looking in the box enough? Do they have to go to the home? Is there any guidance on that?
Yeah, great question. So, EPA says we have to classify it from the main to the building inlet. There are case studies in the guidance, in the EPA guidance, I believe from Michigan, that does 18 inches on either side of the meter box to determine public and private. At this point, TCEQ and EPA has not defined a minimum requirement for that visual inspection. At this point, we're generally accepting visual inspection at the meter box. But, come LCRI, we're not sure what that minimum requirement is going to be. So I would say take a picture for your records if you are using visual inspection at the meter box.
Can I have one last one? Where is it? Oh, can a water system assume a service line with a diameter of greater than 2 inches is non-lead? So let's say that your system has all 6-inch pipes and above. Can you assume those are non-lead? And the answer is no. You still have to have a records review. And what's a great document to use for that records review? Your bid specifications. In the as-built records, especially if it's a subdivision, that's going to specify what the pipe material is, and possibly your distribution system map as well, if it's done correct. If your map is done correctly, it should have the pipe diameter and material on the distribution map. GIS, another system way to do that. So that's all I have. Now it's your guys' turn. What questions y'all have? Guys and gals. Got to be something. This is a safe place, by the way. There's no TCQ police here.
If we have a home that we know was built by checking the appraisal district, built after 1989 or 1989 and later, we're done, right? We can just non-let it. Just wanted to reconfirm that because we've got, large sections of my community.
So his question is, if they can document through their records that the house property, whether it be a house or a commercial building, was built after 1989, those records would document that that's going to be classified as non-lead. Any?
Yeah, so I think in a slide previously, somebody had mentioned that there could be, a lead service line or connection that was built well before the house was built. I think what we need to focus on is the service line was constructed and installed after 1989. After you have reviewed all of your records and review that against the Texas lead ban, that would be considered non-lead.
He was talking about only on the private side, but again, it's going to be records. If you got records from the plumber, the house homeowner may have some construction records that they might have. Anything that you can confirm it with some sort of record, rather than assuming just based on the year long. The year long would not be the record. It's got to be some other document that you can refer to. Is that?
Well, yeah, you're reviewing the year of service line, the year that the service line was constructed and installed against that Texas lead ban, which, as we know, was initiated July 1st, 1988. With those two documents, then it is considered non-lead. And with all of your other record review.
You may have in your city, it could be an ordinance, if it's a WSC, some sort of SOP.
So just a question, because this kind of ties back to what Jason was talking about. So if I understand this correctly, in that scenario, could we say, and Lily, would y'all accept it in the lead copper program, that the customer side service line could be non-lead, but Jason made a note that what if the utility side service line was installed 10 years prior to that, and it was before the lead ban? So it almost seems like maybe the customer side could be non-lead, but maybe the utility side is unknown? Is that kind of, because I think that's tying back to his question. He was thinking, and I kind of thought the same too, hey, you can just call both sides non-lead, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case. And Jason, I don't know if you had anything.
Yeah, because I recently had asked Laura about this question, Laura Higgins. Yes, so that would confirm that the customer side is acceptable as non-lead. And then, so if you compare that to when you put a tap in and say it was past 89, then both of those documents together, that service line would be non-lead.
Right, you would need to evaluate both sides of the service line for each service line. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because I had to confirm that a couple times. I told you, repetition for me. I gotta nail it in. Any other questions? Any other questions that you don't want to ask while you're being recorded? Because we'll be around for a little bit longer. We're going to stick around for the next hour or so. So if you do have any additional questions and you want to discuss any particular scenarios, there seems to be so far, and this is the 11th workshop, there's always a unique scenario in every one of them. So I'm typically following up with an email to Laura or the LCR team there to see, what about this one? So if you have something particular you want to discuss, I would definitely utilize TCQ while they're here. It's better to go straight to the source than the middleman. So.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of really great questions today. We'll be compiling in our FAQ and updating our FAQ on our website periodically.
Okay. Okay, so for those questions that you do have unique scenarios, here is some contact information you can utilize. Also, the FMT program that we mentioned, as far as if you want someone to go out, maybe even rehash what we just talked about, just to make sure you're clear. Or if you're one person out of a staff of 20 and we want to make sure everyone's on the same page. We have seen that. An operator goes back and says, well, they said this. Well, we didn't hear it. If you want us to come out and do it again, so if you need any assistance on site, FMT program, reach out to them, probably best way through email. Oh, it is free, yeah. Yeah, we should make some more of a kind of a commercial where it just kind of scrolls across the screen. It is free. It is not no cost to you. So any assistance, and outside of just being related to the conversation that we're having for lead service inventory, again, there's some information, anything really water related. Financial, managerial, and technical, this is a program that you can utilize, but in this particular context, yes, lead service line inventory, if you have any questions or want help individually, please contact them. And that should be it. Thank you very much.